This is the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
And now let's talk about love.
Love, 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 love. Love is everything we need.
Now we're a little less than 3 weeks into the new pontificate of Pope Leo XIV, and we've already seen and heard him publicly a little bit more than 24 times. In fact, one of my favorite moments was the first time that Pope Leo sung the Regina Caeli in Latin in St. Peter's Square.
Regina Caeli, letare, alleluia, quia quemeruisti.
The Holy Father has quite a voice. In Pope Leo's tone and messaging, and from his various interactions and the stories that we've been hearing about him from family and friends, we can already begin to see how Leo loves. To highlight some of the observable features of what she calls Pope Leo XIV's love life, we're joined live by our regular contributor and resident lovologist, Martha Fernandez-Sardina, who herself strives to be a faith-filled, hope-anchored, love-driven evangelizer and love messenger, announcing the love of the risen Lord to all. Martha is an international bilingual speaker, teacher, trainer, and writer. She's former diocesan director for evangelization and the founder of RememberYouAreLoved.com. Good morning, Martha. Thanks so much for joining us. It's a joy to be with you once again.
Good morning, John. Great to be with you.
Let's set the record clear. What is it that you're calling Pope Leo XIV's love life?
Well, I've noticed a number of things. It's the way he loves. And despite the fact that already, John, can you believe it? There are 3 new books out in 3 weeks of his papacy. So it's too early, far too early to paint a complete picture of this man. And I'm sure that the papacy will change the man. But there are some things that I've noticed, and I want to highlight today 10 ways in which we see how and what and who he loves. In other words, Leo's love life, what it might be like. And those 10 things I want to highlight are the following: his love for Christ, his vocation, mission work and evangelization. Number 4, service and leadership roles and his teaching vocation. Number 5, docility to the Lord. Number 6, his love of revelation, of truth, of the Catholic faith. Number 7, commitment to the church and to unity. Number 8, love of family and friends. Number 9, a healthy love of self. And number 10, to go with number 1, a love for spiritual fitness. So I'll touch on those today, if we can, 2 by 2, and highlight some of the many things that I have observed and heard so far. And some of them come from people who know him well, and others that you could just glean from observing and listening to him.
All right, let's get right to it. What have you noticed about Pope Leo XIV's love life from his early love of Christ and his vocational readiness and steadiness?
Well, precisely that. You notice if you look at his life, the things we know so far anyway, there's a readiness and a steadiness. From a very young age, he has had a steady love of Christ, a piety for the gift of religion, and a love for the Eucharist, which we are told by his own brothers and others who know him, that he had early signs of a vocation since he was a little boy when the others were playing, cops and robbers or whatever. He wanted to celebrate Mass. His mother would put out the ironing board and he would celebrate Mass. He would always ask his brothers, can I give you communion? So you see right there the early signs of his vocation, and that he loved it, that he was really in love with his vocation. Of course, he goes into minor seminary right after graduation from 8th grade. So his high school years were in seminary, and then of course he goes to major seminary. He joins a religious community, the Augustinians, as we know, makes a profession of vows, and then goes into and then becomes a priest, and then of course a bishop and cardinal and all of that. So we see that love of Christ, love of the priesthood. He had an uncle actually who was a priest, and in fact I think it was that uncle who gave him a hat from Peru, and that's how he fell in love with the Peruvian culture and wanted to be a missionary. He also had two aunts. Two of his mother's sisters were religious sisters, so he was accustomed to seeing priests and religious around his home, and he apparently, one can deduce from what we see now from his life, that he began to experience a love for the priesthood, a love for the Eucharist. Obviously, he was already playing priest. And a love for outreach. He, like I said, he wanted to give communion to his brothers. He wanted to become a missionary. He wanted to go to Peru, apparently from a young age. And we see also a love for a neighbor. Very early, one of his brothers tells a story of them going bike riding into a bad part of town. And they encounter apparently what would one call like a little gang of bullies, and they were in for some trouble. And he says that his brother, Rob, as he calls him, got off the bike and said, wait a minute. And he went and talked to them. And then they came back and they were shaking hands. And he said, what did you do? He said, I just spoke with them. So that love of neighbor was evident there. And of course, as I mentioned, that decisiveness with which he then went into minor seminary and major seminary, and the steadiness in his response to God and to that God-given vocation. And then, of course, professing vows with the canon regulars or the Augustinians, and a life of dedication to God. And now, of course, I think, John, that there's a certain ease with which he entered into his role as pastor of souls, as the universal shepherd of the flock of Christ on earth, as Pope. And we see that he seems kind of job ready. He seems rather down to earth and heavenly minded. So there we see some of the things and the people and the ways in which Leo loves.
What about his decision to pursue missionary work and evangelization outreach, which obviously included spending decades in Peru?
Yes, well, we see that there, that mission work and that service and leadership and teaching, because that's part of what he did as well. He was willing and able to shepherd, no matter the flock at the moment, whether it was fellow Augustinians who were in formation, and he was teaching them to think with the mind of Christ, to be critical thinkers, whether it was the poor people in the back countries of Peru. He had an evangelistic, missionary mindedness about him, and appears to have it to this day, calling all of us to bring Christ to the world, to bring people to the church, to have our arms open wide to those who wish to come and join us. So he was also interested in growing the church in the mission fields, and established the church in places where it needed to grow. So he was ready to, as I like to say, to reach, preach, and teach people. And he's certainly dedicated to the poor and to people in all sorts of situations of need. And he would instruct and catechize them. And he talks about that throughout moments of his life. We hear him talk about the necessity of catechizing people, even the poor, because a lot of times people think that serving the poor is just material service that we must render, but no, giving them the light of Christ, to pastor them and to plant the church in people's hearts and in their regions. We see also his love of neighbor, and his love of his vocation and his gift with his leadership role as superior, whether he was regional superior or international superior, or whatever titles they give them in their community, when he served in Chicago, as well as in Latin America, but also in Rome. He spent many years in Rome, serving as the general superior of the Augustinians, and as I mentioned, also teaching theology and spirituality. And so one would assume and one would hope and pray in a Holy Father that he himself is imbued with the desire to live like a saint, to be a saint, not only a missionary, which we should all be, but also to be a saint, which we're all called to be. And it seems that he wants to draw people to that, to a life of grace and a life of goodness. And by the way, there were some Augustinian sisters in Sotillo, Spain, that I listened to a beautiful interview. And they said that he is a very good religious, that he's a deeply spiritual man, that he is, she says, the spirit says, he's clearly Catholic.
Well, we've also seen an attitude of docility and a love for Holy Mother Church from Pope Leo, which again says volumes about his ability to love.
Yes, part of his love life is that docility. I noticed that not only recently, right before he entered the conclave, he said this to one of or both of his brothers, But throughout, I already picked up 2 or 3 other times in his history where he has always, apparently he says this often, all is in God's hands. You know, when one of his brothers asked him, what do you think? He said, all is in God's hands. So that's a certain docility from which we all can learn. A lot of times, you, I, all of us, we want to control things. No, we need to have that docility, which reflects love of God, love of tranquility, a peaceful spirit. And with that also a love of revelation, of truth, of the Catholic faith, a man whose heart rests in God, as his patron, Saint Augustine, would say. Otherwise, we're always restless. If we're not docile, if we're not trusting, if we're not allowing all to be in God's hands, we will be not at peace. And that is something that apparently characterizes him, a certain humility and a peacefulness and a serenity and a surrender to God. And at the same time, which is very interesting and it's a quality to emulate as well, he seems to be put everything in God's hands, but then to use the image of hands, manos a la obra. Manos in Spanish means hands. So he's a hands-on type. Like he lets go. He gets into it. He does the work himself. And that's a good thing because the papacy, obviously, there's a lot of work to be done. But it's a work not of reinventing anything, but of shepherding according to God's heart. So that love of scripture, of tradition, and of the 2,000-year-old magisterium of the church, of revealed truth, shepherding us in that and leading us to that Catholic faith, which is ever ancient and ever new, to the church's doctrine and her liturgy and her customs and traditions. And it seems like he has a respect for that he respects protocols and liturgical expressions and the official language of the church, and he uses Latin often, and the ancient prayers and rites and rituals and the mission of the church. And that's beautiful. And that Catholic faith that he seems to love from a young age also includes her Catholic moral teachings as well as Catholic social teachings, and recognizing and upholding the legitimate rights of families and workers and sovereign nations, but also the right of the church to profess her moral teachings, even amidst all the challenges that continue to arise with all the opportunities that we face. So defending the church is a great thing, and he seems to love both God and man and truth and the church enough to want to carefully keep and teach us to keep all these things in balance. And it's a very delicate balance indeed.
And as the first Augustinian Holy Father, he has shown love for unity, following in the footsteps of the great St. Augustine.
Absolutely. We see that there in Leo's love life also, love for church, for community, for unity, and I'll put together with that love of family and friends because they do go together. And we see it in his motto that calls about being one in the oneness, in the one who is one. In the one, we are one is his motto, and the one being Jesus Christ. And he has that love of church and unity. And here's an interesting thing. Many people would say, if they're observing, that we are in many ways fractured. There are a lot of different things happening in the church that have people kind of divided. And so he is committed to trying to keep us together. And the Lord prayed himself to the Father that we be one so that the world might believe. And so he has a commitment to communion and oneness. And you see that bringing us all the way back to the church fathers and to Peter and the 11 and to the Blessed Virgin Mary and to Christ himself. And he pauses and he prays and he consults and then he decides and he acts. And one of the things that he's known for is being a serene and a calm man. And you see that love also of brothers, of his own brothers. They might think differently, they might choose differently, but they're brothers. And he reaches out to them, they reach out to him. The first days, right after his election, he called one of his brothers several times, and then he said, "Why aren't you answering?" And because all the media was there. But they reach out. They used to talk apparently 2 or 3 times a week and play Wordle and Word with Friends. And so he seems to really love his friends, his family, his people, his flock, to love the Lord, to love truth, to love all that is to be loved. That's Leo's love life.
There's so much more that we could talk about when it comes to Pope Leo's love life, or a life of love. But we are just out of time. Martha, we're going to have to leave it right there. But as always, really appreciate your insights.
Thank you. And I'll put a couple of other things up at rememberyouareloved.com. You can always reach me at info@rememberyouareloved.com. And remember, you are loved.
And so are you. Martha Fernandez-Sardina, the founder of RememberYouAreLoved.com. Do you want your family to stay Catholic? Jesus promised that he will bless the home in which the image of my Sacred Heart shall be exposed and honored. And he also said, and I will establish peace in their families. Join Relevant Radio as we consecrate our families to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through a 54-day Rosary Novena. We'll pray for the needs of our families and church, and especially for our new Holy Father, Pope Leo XIV, as he begins his historic papacy. The Family Rosary across America tonight at 7 p.m. Central here on Relevant Radio. Like what you just heard? Share it with your family and friends. And thanks for listening.